In a couple previous videos, I said that the Paris RER is my favorite rail system anywhere in the world. That was a bold claim for something that I was still yet to witness in person. Well, I can now proudly say, I'm riding the RER. In this video, I'll take you through each of the 5 lines of Paris's half metro, half regional rail, and all-round massive train system that has been high on my bucket list for several years now. Yes, I have a bucket list for trains. I am that nerdy. We'll talk about how the network came to be, how each of the 5 lines differ, and whether it's become a victim of its own success. So, here we go. But first, what exactly is an RER? After all, when you arrive into Paris, whether from a train or a plane, you'll see signs directing you to it. The system is a little difficult to define because it not only does so many things, but there's also virtually nothing like it anywhere in the world. The closest equivalent is the S-Bahn that you see in many German-speaking places, but even those aren't the same from city to city. TrainTube's full-time tenured professor of S-Bahn and even defined 3 different types, which you can learn about in the video in the top right corner. When I arrived at Gare du Nord, I followed the bright RER signs to the dedicated hall on the east side of the station. There's quite a lot of retail behind the fare gates, which is definitely not something that I expected. I was worried that the signage and wayfinding would take quite a while to figure out, but to be honest, it wasn't too bad, and before long, I was on my way. Down on the platform, which is a cross-platform interchange, colored strips on the ground tell you where the lines are. Green for the RER-D, and blue for the incoming RER-B that I would be taking. Line B is the only one of 5 lines that uses mostly single-deck trains, but it is quite heavily used by travelers connecting to Eurostar here at Gare du Nord and at its northern terminus, Charles de Gaulle Airport. I was heading south though, with my train terminating at Robinson. On board these trains are standard LED maps to tell you where the train's heading. Line B is the second busiest of the 5 lines, forming a strong north-to-south artery through Paris. The line first came to be by combining 2 existing suburban railways with a deep but expensive city center tunnel. It's relatively quick and quite express too, as there are several metro lines that intersects without stations. Some other points of interest on Line B are the Stade de France, the main venue for the 2024 Olympic Games and the French men's national football team, as well as Saint-Michel for the Notre Dame, Massy-Palazzo of jet-lag notoriety, and the must-visit Parc des Sceaux. I hate using this phrase, but it really is a hidden gem. When I was down in Sceaux, I noticed something that I wasn't really prepared for, an RER train that itself runs express between certain stops. Fortunately, the signage does a good job at communicating that. Back to my first trip on the RER-B though, I got off at the super hub of Châtelet-Léal to switch over to the crown jewel of the RER network, Line A. Here you can see some of the older RER signage that makes clear the train's so-called mission. This is a 4-letter code that tells you where the train is headed, with the first letter corresponding to the terminus. It can be a little confusing, but the signage does a pretty good job at easing things. Anyway, time to cross to Châtelet and get on board Line A. Lines A and B do have cross-platform interchanges in the same direction, but since I needed to go west, I couldn't use it. When you think of the RER, you think of this line. Double-deck trains with 3 doors per car and huge crowds to boot. The full through-running service began in 1977, and to say that it's been a roaring success is an understatement almost as large as the trains themselves. I think the screens on these older RER-A trains aren't the best. They don't give you an indication of where the connecting services are at each station, which especially for this line is not ideal. Sitting on the lower deck gives you this really unique view of the platforms. This is Aubert, which is connected to Opéra and Saint-Lazare to make another mega hub in a similar vein to Châtelet. Next up is Charles de Gaulle Étoile, right under the Arc de Triomphe, and then is the new urban center of La Défense that I'll be giving a dedicated video soon. Make sure to subscribe if that's something that interests you. Take a look at this screen. It not only tells you which branch the current train is heading on, but also when the next train on the other branch is arriving. Disneyland mentioned? Oh wow. These trains are so big that I can't even... I feel the resistance of the train coming in as I pull my back down. There's a train that's just going to depot. Good thing that means there's no passengers on it. On this map, you see Metro Line 1 appearing a lot. That's no coincidence. The RER-A was specifically built as a relief for Line 1, and while it softened the blow a little, crowds are still common. This west to east corridor is just so vital to the city. Look at that level boarding. If there's one thing you could say about Line A as a criticism, it's that having 3 mezzanine level doors on double-deck trains is not the most efficient. While there are more doors that in theory speeds up boarding, so much of the train is taken up by stairs and vestibules that people end up crowding the doors at busy times. It means that on this type of train, counterintuitively, dwell times are longer with more doors. That's not the case on single-deck metros. RER A and B are 2 lines that I would class as express metros. They make few stops in the city center, but the places that they do stop are vital nodes with plenty of onward connections, including major long-distance railway stations. These are likely the 2 lines that were the main inspiration behind London's Elizabeth line. Lines A and B also have a common feature that the other 3 lines don't: dual voltage operation, or interconnection as it's known. That's because the suburban lines are SNCF infrastructure that use overhead lines, and the city center tunnels were RATP builds using third rail like the metro lines. RERC, meanwhile, is not like the others at all. To understand why, let's look at the maps here at Porte de Clichy. See all that branching? The line goes so many places that there are certain sections, including here in a relatively central area, where the frequencies are just not good enough. It was 15 minutes when I was here. The further along you get on the line, the more frequency increases, but you can also tell that you're not really going anywhere fast. The Line C infrastructure is quite dated, and the service pattern means that it's a lot more oriented towards the suburbs rather than the city. It also doesn't get that central compared to the other RER lines, but it does still connect to plenty of attractions. Check out this view of the Eiffel Tower as we exit the tunnels. After that, we run just beneath the surface along the south bank of the Seine, making quite frequent stops. Because of this, the RERC intersects with every metro line except 11 and the BIS lines, but crucially not RERA. This all makes Line C feel like a slow metro in the city center and a slightly fancier suburban train outside of it. Kind of the worst of both worlds. It was at least cheaper to get this line going compared to Lines A and B that required major tunneling work through established parts of Paris. Heading south, RERC follows the main line out of Gare d'Austerlitz, not the most major of railway stations in Paris, but it does carry regional trains that serve... Okay, let's try to say this right. Centre Val de Loire. I tried, okay? I tried. It is also worth mentioning that one branch of Line C was converted recently into the T12 tram train, and I will be talking about in more detail in another future video. Continuing along the alphabet, RERD is kind of like a messier RERB. It reminds me a lot of Thameslink in that sense, with the northern half being quite simple and the southern half having all sorts of branches. The main choke point for Line D is that it shares a tunnel with Line B between Châtelet and Gare du Nord, which constrains frequency on both lines, though Line D gets lower priority, so it has less frequency. Here on Line D, I got to catch the newest train on the network, the RER NG, that is also used on Line E. They are built on the Alstom Extrapolis platform, which is most well known for its use across Australia, and has a mix of single and double-deck cars. The train has fully open gangways, and the lower decks have some longitudinal seating to increase standing room on short trips. The single-deck cars are deliberately designed to allow level boarding and not require passengers with reduced mobility to use stairs. The seats themselves are of course really colorful, and you get the latest in digital wayfinding that tells you everything you need to know very clearly, including ETAs at stations. Most of all, it's nice to be in a train with 3+2 seats that don't feel like I'm bumping into every other chair. The RERD is the longest line on the system, and some parts of it extend beyond the Ile-de-France fare zones, which isn't exactly great for integration. Also, the RERD is the least punctual among the 5 lines. And finally, let's look at RERE. This is the newest of the 5 lines, and definitely the coolest if you're a fan of epic builds like me. The line first opened in 1999, with 2 suburban branches to the east, and ending at Saint-Lazare, rather than running through to the west. That changed just 2 years ago though, with an extension to Neuilly and La Défense opening, bringing with it 2 of the most breathtaking train stations I've seen anywhere in the world. Further extensions west are just a matter of time, including taking over a branch that's currently served by Line A. Line E does kind of relieve Line A, at least in the western half of the city, with its broadly east-west running and several common stations. I did want to take some time to highlight the 2 new stations because I think they do a great job of explaining the RER's design language. Everything here feels so dynamic, with a sense of verticality that you don't often find in complex stations somewhere like London. These are spaces that make you feel like you're moving through them. It also helps that every rail line in Paris is a single letter or number, which makes the signage a lot bolder. I don't say all this just to aimlessly glaze Paris. I do think it's an important conversation to have about how we design large spaces. It's a lot easier to make sense of where you are when the space itself exposes everything to you. This can also be found in some parts of the relatively new Metro Line 14, and it certainly made me feel at ease in a new city. Because yes, as much as I love trains, and make myself seem like I know everything about trains, I can and often do get lost in new surroundings. So those are the 5 lines of the RER as they are today. There are no immediate plans for major extensions, but of course the new metro line to the Grand Paris Express will have multiple connections to the RER. That could help reduce crowding for suburb-to-suburb trips, but much of the work to improve the system will have to come from within. Line A first pioneered the SASM signaling system in 1989, but it intends to move to CBTC very soon. Lines B and D really need to fix the bottleneck at Châtelet too, and new rolling stock may go some way to address one of the system's less noticed problems, air pollution. Now here's an interesting question to think about. Has the RER been too successful? It's a thought I've had a couple times because of just how many modernizations it seems to be undergoing, just to very slightly increase throughput. The investments in infrastructure that were made decades ago are clearly still paying dividends, and it deserves a lot of praise for not only the forward thinking of transit planners back then, but also how every inch of marginal gain is being squeezed out of these tunnels. When you're at such a scale though, you do start to wonder about the trade-off between capacity of the vehicles and frequency of the service. Double-deck trains do slow things down with much longer dwell times, but they fundamentally move more people per vehicle. I can't tell if it's a bug or a feature that you can sometimes see the next train arriving before the previous one clears the platform. Ultimately, I think the best approach is what we're seeing now with the latest rolling stock that has a mix of single and double-deck cars. Ideally, you would go on a single-deck car if you were making a short trip, and double-deck for a longer trip, but whether everyone will think that way isn't exactly clear. When it comes to human behavior and crowd control, optimality is hard to strive for. After all, when that many people want to travel, sometimes just making it onto the train at all is what counts. But what about other French cities? Do they have RERs? After all, almost every German city has something that they call an S-Bahn. Even if they all look a little bit different, the principle is very similar across the board. Meanwhile, in Italy, you have Milan with their S-lines that are quite expansive in their own right, but many other cities across the country, like Turin, Naples, and of course Rome, have suburban railways with underground city center tunnels. And in Spain, there's about a dozen different cercanías networks, from the massive ones like Madrid and Barcelona to the single lines in Zaragoza. Of course, they're not all called cercanías because there's a lot of other languages spoken in Spain, but, you know, they're all run by Renfe. But yeah, while those 3 countries have quite a lot of suburban rail systems with underground city center tunnels, Paris is the only city in France with an RER type system, which I think is quite a shame. In my video that I made about the Rodalies network in Catalonia, I showed you this table, which highlights the average number of rail trips made across the EU per capita. Italy and Spain are notably low, but France isn't that much higher, only a bit over half that of Germany. And I wonder how much of that is down to Paris. A lot of French cities didn't really build commuter railways back when that was a thing, so that's left them a bit shortchanged, and is why some of their trams end up doing quite a lot of heavy lifting for regional rail in their own right. There is a hope that was pushed by the government that other French cities will soon get RERs, with Strasbourg being the first ones to make a real push. Their network, known as the... okay, let's try this. Réseau Express Métropolitain Européen. I think that's good enough. Or the REM. Isn't still at its fullest extent, but it does have some momentum around it, at least I hope. Though no other French cities have made a real effort to get that going, at least not yet. So that's probably why, even with all the high-speed trains, France lags behind several other countries across the EU in terms of people riding trains on a regular basis. Because yeah, the Ile-de-France region is really strong, but it does make you wonder if the rest of the country is being neglected. It's a lot like London in that sense, where the country is dominated by just one city and region. But even still, there are several UK cities that I think have underrated suburban rail systems, like Liverpool, Glasgow, and Birmingham to an extent. But anyway, I'm getting a bit off script. But yeah, that is my Paris RER video. Thanks so much for watching. I love these trains. I can talk about them for really long, but I did a lot more in Paris as well. So if you want to see more from my trip to the French capital, make sure to stay tuned for my future uploads. And I'll see you next time.